Hello, I'm Gavin Lee. Welcome to The World This Week, where we analyse and distill another breathtaking 7 days of constant breaking news into 45 minutes to better understand what's happened, where it's heading, alongside 4 distinguished foreign correspondents. In a week that's seen a new ayatollah proclaimed in Iran, not yet seen or heard and assumed to be in hiding, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the assassinated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, is also reported to have been injured in the airstrike that killed his father. Zinda Bad Khamenei, long live Khamenei, shouted a mob of supporters on the streets. That's what was shown on state TV. At night, residents of Tehran risked the regime's wrath by recording sounds in the city, those shouting from behind windows or from balconies. Bar Mojtaba, death to Mojtaba. A statement from the new Supreme Leader made it clear that all US and Israeli interests in the region will continue to be attacked. The Straits of Hormuz will stay closed and, quote, a never-ending retaliation will be sought.
Enemy is actually very vulnerable, and I would like to assure you that the revenge will be taken.
It's been a week where President Trump gave vague and contradictory statements suggesting the mission is almost accomplished, calling it very complete, pretty much in one interview, whereas in another he said, quote, we've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough, adding that strikes would continue, saying tonight it will be over when he feels it in his bones. More than 15,000 targets have already been struck, reports suggesting some senior White House officials were furious at Israel's decision to strike oil installations in Tehran, with concern that the apocalyptic images of the blackened skies don't sit well against the narrative of precision strikes in the battle for hearts and minds. This comes just days after a girls' school was struck by a Tomahawk missile, killing more than 160. 110 of them children. Preliminary reports from Washington suggest it was a US intelligence mistake.
Whether it's Iran or somebody else, the fact that a tomahawk is very generic. It's sold to other countries, but that's being investigated right now.
You just suggested that Iran somehow got its hands on a tomahawk and bombed its own elementary school on the first day of the war. But you're the only person in your government saying this. Why are you the only person saying this?
Because I just don't know enough about it.
And it's been a week that's seen the biggest global disruption to fuel supplies, reportedly in the history of the oil market, as Iran effectively shut the Straits of Hormuz, the single most critical sea corridor for the industry. Shipping tankers that took the risk of being attacked by so-called suicide drones, unmanned naval attack drones filled with explosives solely designed to crash into a target. At least 20,000 shipping staff estimated to be stuck on different vessels, unable to leave, as the exit route is now a war zone. 8 have been killed by strikes. Meanwhile, the missiles and drone attacks continue on neighbouring Gulf states, despite the Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian appearing to call a halt to it and apologise on television. He's since said he was misquoted by the enemy as ports and energy infrastructure in Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Qatar were targeted, and the strikes on the UAE made headlines for different reasons as the authorities in Dubai came under scrutiny for charging a British tourist with the offence of disturbing public security for filming Iranian missiles while on holiday. He says he meant no harm. The government denied accusations of censorship.
But it's important we get the right information out to people, the clear information. I mean, God forbid if people, are using AI to generate stuff that it's the wrong information, and that's not the way our authorities, our national crisis and emergency authorities work.
Let's meet the panel tonight. Let's first go to London. Welcome Christina Lamb, Chief Foreign Correspondent for the Sunday Times, renowned war reporter and the best-selling author of 10 books, including The Sewing Circle of Herat, Small Wars Permitting, I Am Malala, co-written with Malala Yousafzai, and Our Bodies, Their Battlefield, War Through the Lives of Women, investigating how sexual violence is used as a weapon in war zones. Welcome to the programme, Christina. It is fantastic to have you with us this week. Can I mention Our Bodies, Their Battlefield in the context of what we're talking about tonight? I'm minded by something you said in this book. It was released at the time, and you said this to Time magazine, quote, war isn't just the fighting, it is people trying to keep their lives together when all hell is breaking loose around them.
That's what we're seeing at the moment, very much, and that's, I think, very important for us to reflect on.
I know you've reported this week from the situation in Iran, talking with contacts. You're synonymous with on-the-ground, often high-risk reporting, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Pakistan, Ukraine, to name a few. Tell us how you calibrate the challenge at the moment of trying to report on Iran. And very few journalists allowed in. I think one crew, CNN, allowed in briefly this week, and trying to get reliable information from within right now.
Sure. I mean, it's very difficult. Obviously, I would love to be there.
Christian, you can probably hear there is a sound problem. We're going to come back to you in just a moment while we sort that issue. Let's go to Berlin in the meantime. Let's bring in Stephen Erlanger, the chief diplomatic correspondent in Europe for the New York Times. Stephen, welcome back to you as well. I should say, recipient of the French Légion d'honneur, knighted for services to journalism, sharing 2 Pulitzer Prizes as well, Stephen, for your work. Welcome back. Tell us about your week.
Well, my week has been pretty wrapped up with Iran. I mean, I covered the revolution in Iran, 78 and 79, as a very young journalist. It taught me a great deal. And then I was expelled with all the Americans in 79. But I've tried to follow Iran ever since. I've covered the Iran nuclear talks. And I've been based in Israel as well, covering Israel-Palestine. So this war has been, in a way, very personal. I feel it very strongly. But I think Donald Trump has misunderstood the nature of the Iranian regime. He's misunderstood the resilience of a system that was built over 47 years. And I think he's wasn't fully aware of what might happen if Iran, as everyone predicted it would, expanded the war, raised the costs of the global economy through pressures on oil and gas, the Strait of Hormuz, and said, basically, we will outlast you. So we'll see. I mean, the war continues in a quite dramatic way, while Israel is taking advantage of Hezbollah's perhaps foolish attack on itself in solidarity with Iran to really whack southern Lebanon in a very severe way. So there's a lot going on here.
There is a lot going on. It's going to be good to hear your voice. I was looking back at one of your articles you wrote. I think you were a senior editor at the time for the Boston Globe. And I was reading that around 1979. So your input is going to be fascinating tonight as well, Stephen. Let's move from Berlin. Let's go to Beirut. Let's bring in France 24's award-winning senior foreign correspondent, Catherine Norris-Trent. Brilliant to have you with us as well tonight, Catherine, in a week where I mentioned a short while ago, not even the hotels on the famous Corniche are safe. People have been taking shelter all over the city, including in the National Theatre. How are you? And tell us about what you've been seeing this week.
Hi, Gavin. It's great to be with you and all the panel. It's been a very hectic week here, as you can imagine. Every day, every night, there have been airstrikes, not just in the southern suburbs of Beirut, but yes, in hotels, in apartment blocks, on cars along the seafront, in different areas of the capital. And that's really provoking a lot of fear here because people don't know where it's going to be hit next. Some of these strikes are targeted strikes and are not announced, and they happen in the dead of night. So people are clearly worried where the next ones are going to fall. And, you know, we've seen so many people leaving their homes, sleeping on the streets, sleeping in cars, trying to find shelter. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty and fear here at the moment.
Thank you for being with us tonight, Catherine. You're setting the scene for what's going on in the Lebanese capital. I want to also bring in the studio with us tonight Richard Worley, correspondent for the Swiss publication Blick, author of Cette Amérique qui nous déteste, How This America Hates Us, and A Ball of Illusions, What France Believe and What the World Sees. Great to see you, Richard, as always.
Thank you, Gavin.
I want to talk about the many ripple effects with you all tonight of the Iran war, but I want to hear your take, first of all, on Erbil, northern Iraq. We reported in the programme the last 24 hours the death of a French soldier by an Iranian drone. What's your understanding? What's been going on?
Well, my understanding is that France is taking risks. Emmanuel Macron is taking risks since the beginning of this crisis. First of all, because France's army is positioned in the region. It has bases in Abu Dhabi, it has bases in Djibouti and in northern Iraq, in Iraqi Kurdistan. And in addition, Emmanuel Macron himself is trying to get involved in the Lebanon crisis, trying to diffuse the tension with Israel, trying to convince Benjamin Netanyahu not to launch an all-scale war against the Hezbollah. So when you take risk, at some point, you may be hit or you may be targeted. And that is what's happening. President Macron today said he remain and France remain on the defensive. There is no talk at all of an offensive position. But when you are a target, you risk a lot.
It's very hard to understand exactly, to calibrate what European governments mean, Britain, France, Germany, by defensive and not offensive, isn't it?
Well, my understanding of France is that France remains committed, and President Macron has said several times that the country will commit to its allies, namely 3 Middle East countries with defense treaty, Kuwait, Qatar and United Arab Emirates. Those are those 3 countries. If they call for French military assistance, President Macron has said that he will reply and he will be there. Now, that means France is involved in the defense. It means it should not target directly site in Iran. Now, the question as we speak is, does France consider that this dead soldier, this dead person justify eventually some kind of strike? It seems not to be the case.
Richard, great that you're with us as well. Let's start from where in Beirut, where Catherine is. We'll move 230 kilometers southwest to the Hakia military base in Tel Aviv. This is Israel's military command center. It was 9 p.m. Thursday night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu giving the first press conference since the war began 2 weeks ago. In it, he claimed that Iran was no longer the same after the attacks, that the power shift in the Middle East was making Israel more of a superpower, he said, than ever, and that his forces were, quote, crushing both Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon. He had a warning for the new Ayatollah too. I wouldn't take out any life insurance, he said. He set out 3 war aims: to stop Iran acquiring nuclear weapons, to destroy its ballistic missile program, and he spoke of trying to advance a new objective.
To create the conditions for the Iranian people that can remove this tyrant regime that is oppressing it for nearly 50 years. We are delivering decisive blows on the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the Basij, in its headquarters, in its checkpoints, and there's still more to come. To the Iranian people, I say, the moment that you can embark on a new journey of freedom, this moment is coming closer. We stand by your side. We are helping you.
On the ground in Iran, with little detail coming through because of an internet blackout in place, there have been no reports of any attempts of an uprising so far, with the Iranian police chief Ahmed Reza Radan saying that with forces from the Revolutionary Guard and the volunteer militia known as the Basij patrolling day and night, he said, protests will be treated as enemy action and suppressed. Well, news came through on Wednesday that for the first time there had been drone strikes in the streets of Tehran on checkpoints run by the Basij. At the same time, the HQ of Iran's oldest bank, Separ, was struck by an airstrike in the capital, a bank said to be key in paying the salaries of Iran's military and paramilitaries, coming just ahead of the Persian New Year, March the 21st, when salaries and bonuses are paid. Well, Iran's foreign minister vowed specific retaliation, and we've seen several international banks in the Gulf closed temporarily as a precaution. While Iran continues to hit back in Israel, across the Gulf and in Iraq, there are questions over what happened to a US refueling aircraft. Crucial to the bombing rage, crashed in what appears to be a mid-air collision with another aircraft with 6 members killed. Christina, let's start with you. Let's start within Iran. The apparent development in tactics, Netanyahu's quote, conditions being created for the people. What do you make of that?
The problem with this is that, as we know, thousands and thousands of people came out on the streets in January, reacting largely to a call by Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah of Iran. And what we saw was an absolutely horrific massacre in 2 days. We still do not know exactly how many people were killed, but estimates are around 30,000 people. So, to call on people to come out again is, really a very difficult thing. And people that I've been speaking to inside Iran are really struggling to imagine doing this. I mean, they tell me that and most of the people I'm speaking to are activists, so it's a particular point of view. But they are happy to have the strikes. They want them to continue. Their biggest fear is that President Trump will suddenly just declare victory and end this and leave them with the regime. But on the other hand, they're very scared of the regime. So the idea of them actually coming out on the streets and facing the wrath of the regime, it does seem extremely unlikely at the moment.
It seems extremely unlikely, Stephen, says Christina. Critics of the regime, though, notably calling him The nepo-ayatollah already, the founding of the Republic, which you covered, as we talked about, the leading clerics in the country pledged to prevent nepotism and ensure that the supreme leader would not become hereditary. What does this tell us, do you think, Stephen, about the regime's repositioning right now?
Well, it's interesting because his father, Ayatollah Khamenei, was against an inherited successor because of the Shah and the monarchy. And the new regime decided to ignore that. The assumption we have is that Mojtaba Khamenei has been very close to the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. In fact, he served with them in a non-combat role, but he is very close to them. And in wartime, it is the military and the IRGC which is sworn to defend the Islamic Republic, and the supreme leader, which seems to be calling the shots. What's interesting is that before his death, Ayatollah Khamenei, the father, had set out quite a serious succession program, expecting another war, giving provincial authorities more control over their responses, and naming 3 to 4 possible successors for almost every important role. So this is a regime that wants to preserve itself, that planned to preserve itself, and I think believes that survival by itself is a victory. I think we see a much more security-minded regime under the cover of Islam. They'll wave the green flag, but right now it feels more like a military government than an Islamist one.
And to that point as well, it would be very hard right now, wouldn't it, Richard, to see President Trump declaring some kind of victory speech, knowing that there's a succession just taking place. And I also wanted to pick on Stephen's point, to quote the late Queen of England, who said, "One has to be seen to be believed." The success of the Ayatollah in hiding, unseen still, but he's made a statement. What are you reading into that?
Well, I would not say he's made a statement. I would say there was a statement.
Made on his behalf.
There is a statement on his behalf. And that's all the question. And I even myself, in a story that I wrote, I asked the question whether he may be dead. That's a possibility that we cannot exclude. And that would fit exactly with what Stephen is saying, meaning a military regime taking control over Iran with an Islamic facade, and a very convenient Islamic facade if the new Khamenei, the young Khamenei, is dead or very much wounded. So that's a possibility that we cannot exclude. Now, there is another possibility. The other possibility is that he's alive, he's in hiding, and at some point we will see him. This morning I was watching the press conference by U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth say he's been badly wounded, that his face is somewhat mutilated. So now that the Secretary of War has said so, imagine if tomorrow or after tomorrow the new Khamenei comes out and is seen on video, active and alive. That would be clearly a blunt failure for the American. So at the moment, we have only one possibility, it's to guess.
Catherine, there is a crude, rather disconcerting military term that Israel's military uses to explain its tactic of killing the top layers of the Iranian commanders and the groups it backs, like Hezbollah in Lebanon. It calls it mowing the lawn. Tell us what that's meant in terms of strikes in Lebanon, the significant militant figures Israel says that it's taken out.
Well, it's meant basically strikes on areas such as the Dahieh, the southern suburbs of Beirut, which are a Hezbollah stronghold. There have been, dozens of strikes on those. In fact, there were just a couple before I came on there for this program. And once again, we can see the smoke rising in the background from where we are. But it's also meant, these targeted strikes where Israel says it's taken out members of Iran's Revolutionary Guards or the Al-Quds Force, linked to Iran, or members of Hamas in strikes on hotels or residential buildings. So we don't have confirmation of that. That's what Israel is saying. But they say that, that they're carrying out these strikes because the Lebanese government hasn't been willing or able, and the Lebanese armed forces haven't done so for the past 16 months when there was a truce. And so they're taking matters into their own hands. And I just want to show you something also, which is an Israeli tactic we've seen just today they've been dropping leaflets into central Beirut, airdropping them. They landed on a central neighborhood, Hamra, and that sparked a lot of fear. So there's a kind of psychological element to this as well, with people feeling that they're being very much watched and the messages are coming through to them. This Israeli leaflet in Arabic says, after the success, I'm quoting here, in Gaza, this is the new reality in Lebanon. And on the other side, I'm going to turn it around for those who can see, they've put out a leaflet with QR codes actually at the bottom, saying you can get in contact with us and basically become an agent. Now, the Lebanese army has warned people not to scan those QR codes, saying it's a big security risk, and clearly many people were extremely afraid and they saw these leaflets coming down. So Israel deploying a number of tactics in Lebanon, including strikes in areas in central Beirut, just hundreds of meters away from government offices, from foreign embassies, from the UN building, saying that they are going to act, sending this message out and calling on the Lebanese people to rise up against Hezbollah and get in contact with them.
It's very interesting, Catherine, what seems to still be a vain hope at the moment, 2 weeks on, a similar method to what we've seen in Iran. Again, the press conference by Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday calling on Iranians to rise up. Christina, there's still more questions as well about what happened in the north of Iran, the killing at a girls' school, more than 160 people, including 110 children. The majority were told between 7 and 12. The UN says attacks on students and schools are amongst the gravest breaches of international law. And investigations, we're told, are ongoing. It appears to be a US intelligence failure. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and of course at the beginning,
We think we're going to come back to you again. We've got a second problem with your connection, Christina. Stephen, to that point in Berlin, the questions, there have been some questions, including I spoke to Jen Gavito earlier tonight, former advisor to President Biden, who said that the intelligence assessment, at least preliminary, shouldn't take this long.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that this was a U.S. Tomahawk missile. There was a big base nearby. We've had some pretty good investigative reporting showing that there are Tomahawk parts that were in the school. The U.S. has Tomahawks, Iran doesn't. Mr. Trump's wrong about that. Our reporting suggests that there was a mistargeting, that the school was on a target list and should not have been, and that the strike was deliberate. Now, the United States says it's investigating, and I suspect that's true. I'm sure that's true, but it has been very reluctant to take responsibilities so far. It does remind me of other targeting accidents, including during the Kosovo War, when the Americans bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade because they had outdated maps. So these things unfortunately happen, and it's a horror for the children. I mean, this is kind of a given, but it does seem as if this was a Tomahawk strike from an American naval ship that was aimed at the school, which apparently had been put on a target list by error.
Richard, listening to Stephen and just also trying to understand the perspective right now from within the White House. When we look at the retaliation, the Straits of Hormuz, we said right at the top, effectively at a standstill. Threats continue. Gulf states are shooting down drones, some getting through. The death toll is creeping up slowly. Tourists are scared to be there. And you have, in Europe and beyond, petrol prices that are spiking. Flip that. President Trump says this is a moment of pain for long-term gain. And he's not alone. Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, saying Washington knows what it's doing.
Okay, well, Mark Rutte has been, since he took over at NATO, probably the most faithful Trump follower. He's got to try to secure the US commitment to NATO, and he has decided the best way to do that is to stick as much as possible to Donald Trump. So I would personally not rely on Mr. Rutte's assessment, because I think he is completely biased. Now the question about Hormuz is very simple. It might be a short pain. Yes, well, if it reopens in the coming days, and if it reopens in the coming hours. Now, let's see if the Strait of Hormuz is still closed and impossible to cross in about a week's time, in about 2 weeks' time. Will it still be a short pain? And I believe Mr. Trump, the President Trump, is in a very different position than European leaders, because the US, we all know, have reserve of oil, is self-sufficient as far as oil is concerned, and the US has now got a grab on Venezuela oil. Through the oil of Venezuela is difficult to refine. Now, who is suffering the most economically speaking? On the one hand, is certainly China, and that's probably the goal of Mr. Trump. It's Southeast Asia, because all these emerging countries do rely on oil from the Middle East, and Europe. So I would say that let's take Donald Trump's word. If it's a short pain, then we should see the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, let's say, by Tuesday or Wednesday.
Short-term pain is how President Trump puts it. Stephen, short-term gain for President Putin. If we were talking about him being brought in from the cold last year in Alaska meeting President Trump, now we're hearing that sanctions are being lifted temporarily on countries taking Russian oil that's already at sea. President Zelensky very unhappy about that. What's your take on this development? Russia, on one hand, we'll read the British press today, maybe in Germany too, Stephen, saying that Putin's hand is behind Iranian intelligence on its strikes. Now he's being given, well, a card by President Trump.
Well, both Chancellor Merz of Germany and Emmanuel Macron came out against this today, I believe. They both said that it was wrong, that it was a mistake for the United States to lift sanctions on Russian oil even temporarily, and they did not want the European Union to do the same. Now, money will flow into Russia, there's no question. I mean, the oil market is fungible. So American oil producers will also make money, but Russian oil producers and the state will clearly make money. We'll see for how long. That's really the point. Russia's been selling oil at a great discount. But I don't think even before this war, the Russian economy was at the point where it was going to harm what it was doing in Ukraine. But this may make it easier. I think one can exaggerate the impact, but there's no question this benefits the Russian state, and it benefits basically almost every oil producer that is not subject to sending oil through the Strait of Hormuz.
It's a very good point you raise, perhaps not understate or overstate the impact, but to try and understand what I think the analysts suggest it will perhaps help the Russian economy by maybe around $150 million a day for the next 30 days or so. Comparative to its current situation, it's only temporary. Just frame that for us if you can, Stephen.
Well, it's important, don't misunderstand me. It's money. Money is real. And Russia's hard currency reserves were going down. But I don't expect this war is going to last, much, much longer. I may be wrong, of course. And I think part of the way it ends is a deal on the Strait of Hormuz, because Iran depends on the Strait of Hormuz to get its oil out, right? I mean, it's not like Iran oil exports aren't suffering from the closure of the strait. So Iran has an interest in resolving this. Now, what the price will be, we'll see. I mean, we don't know how the war is going to end. And of course, as we've been seeing, U.S. aims and Israeli aims may not be the same. And the U.S. may be on a different timetable than Israel would like it to be. But again, that's all, I think, several days into the future to see.
Catherine, Stephen talked about President Macron. It's also we're going to go to Catherine in just a moment. Let me bring in Richard at this point. President Macron in Lebanon this week, where Catherine is. Cyprus too, speaking from the deck of the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, singing the Marseillaise with troops as well, to which I think it kind of contrasts with the fortunes of the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. There's been a lot of criticism for him, the fact that it was the Akrotiri base, the British base, that a drone targeted in Cyprus. They haven't been able to, so far, up until a few days ago, scramble a ship to get there.
Well, I understand from what I'm reading that there are numerous problems in the British Navy, and that they are discovering these problems in a time of war, which is rather problematic.
All 4 destroyers were out for repair.
Exactly. So on the one hand, you've got the structural problems of the British Navy, and apparently they have to be addressed. They were not addressed before, which is surprising, at least to me, surprising. And then you have Emmanuel Macron, let's say, position. He is positioning himself once again, it is not the first time, as a European leader or as the leader of Europe. Now, is he followed by European countries? Not. No. I mean, all European countries on this war try to have their own strategy. Italy, for example, has decided to withdraw some contingent, Germany being very prudent. I understand the Netherlands have sent the frigate. I understand Spain has sent the frigate alongside the Charles de Gaulle as well. Greece, I mean, obviously are very much concerned by Cyprus. So Emmanuel Macron is walking a tightrope. He tries to be a European leader. He tries to show that Europe should do something, especially for Lebanon. But when he turns around and when he look at behind him, there is nobody following. So that's a problem. And that comes in addition to the risk he's taking with the military base and the soldier who was killed. So I would say for Emmanuel Macron, at some point, he can talk. He can make proposal, he can bring forward the Charles de Gaulle to a certain, let's say, distance, but certainly not expose the Charles de Gaulle directly to Iranian missile. That would be too risky, I mean, my opinion.
Talking about manoeuvres at sea, Stephen, Winston Churchill, as you know, was quoted recently by President Trump saying Starmer is no Churchill. To quote Churchill, go back to 1911 when he was first Sea Lord of the Admiralty. He said this about the strategic value of oil to the British Empire at the time. He said, quote, "Fortune brought us a prize from fairyland beyond our wildest dreams. Mastery itself was the prize of the venture." Fast forward 115 years. Does this resonate with events playing out? We're hearing within this crisis reports that President Trump is considering seizing Carg Island, which is this key terminal for crude oil.
Well, first of all, let's make sure that's a real Winston Churchill quote, because there are lots of quotes that are ascribed to Winston Churchill, but never mind, let's presume so. Yeah, I mean, oil matters to Iran, obviously so, and Iran has been under great sanctions by the UN, by the EU, by the Americans. Its economy is a mess. If you believe that a new regime can come into place, or an altered regime, or a more moderate regime that's willing to talk, to actually have negotiations, then you really don't want to disrupt the economy further. Now, Carg Island is important, but it would be a very risky effort to take. And, you know, some people are arguing that it would be good leverage if you take it and then force the Iranians to negotiate. But my sense is right now the Iranians see the Strait of Hormuz as their leverage, and they're not selling any oil anyway. So for the purpose of the war, I don't think it would make that much difference.
Richard, do you want to come in?
No. I completely agree. Now, my personal interrogation is Trump at some point now. It seems to me that he will need a big success, a success that he can put on stage, a success with television, a success that becomes an attraction. And the seizure of the island of Carg could play that role. Nevertheless, what Stephen said rightly about the business and oil itself. But having the American television there on the island of Carg, taken by American commando, to me, it sounds like a good spectacle, un bon spectacle.
I want to ask you again, we're having problems with Catherine's communications in Beirut and also with Christina's line. Oh, we're back to Catherine. Catherine, I was asking Richard a moment ago about Macron's manoeuvres in the Middle East, in Lebanon, as you saw a couple of days ago, also in Cyprus this week, at a time where Keir Starmer has not been able to get the ship so far to Cyprus, even though British base was struck. This is a moment in the kind of a legacy moment in the spotlight for President Macron, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and critics of Emmanuel Macron, of course, accuse him of trying to do more on the international scene than he can do at home because of the political paralysis and because of his deep unpopularity in France. But it's true that he has expressed his deep concern about Lebanon, even going so far as to intervene and to speak to Benjamin Netanyahu, asking him not to massively bomb the southern suburbs, calling for direct peace talks, trying to negotiate that. So far, to little avail. That doesn't seem to have been heeded by the Israeli leader or by Donald Trump, for that matter. But it's true that France has historic links with Lebanon. There's a lot of people here who remember Emmanuel Macron's visit to the port of Beirut shortly after that massive explosion, which did so much damage here, and people hoping that perhaps he could play a role. So Emmanuel Macron's working to intervene. I think those diplomatic efforts are still going on behalf of the French president and his team. But so far, it doesn't look like there's a resolution to this crisis despite those diplomatic efforts.
Christina, you've picked up on White House communications, I note, this week. The Pret Office has been sharing updates on the Iran strikes in video game format, while the Iranian state media, you may have seen on social media as well, has been putting out video propaganda of the regime, basically like Lego-like cartoon heroes, depicting Trump as the great Satan and Netanyahu as the little Satan. What are you making of the kind of efforts to use social media to shape to public opinion? Is it working?
Well, first of all, sorry about my communications problems. I wish I could say that I was somewhere a bit more exotic than London. But anyway.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah. Good. I mean, look, some of the things that the White House put out, first of all, last week, the kind of Top Gun style, very macho video, then this week, this cartoon type thing, a sort of Nintendo-like, almost like video game. First of all, it's a little bit jarring, right? Because people are being killed, and this is almost sort of trivializing it. And I have to say, when somebody drew my attention to both of these, i.e. last week and this week, each time I thought they can't be real. They must be fake. And there's no way that the White House could be putting something like this out. But in fact, it is. So, I'm not sure that is, I'm not quite sure who they're trying to convince with this kind of video. I find it rather distasteful.
Richard, rather distasteful. I'm just thinking for the audience that one of the lines coming from sources within the White House, briefing reporters, is that this connects with a younger generation, Gen Z, TikTok. It's certainly a question of taste. I also want your thoughts on this. We've talked about Russia. We've talked about European leaders. What we haven't talked about is an area you have extensive knowledge. Richard, you've lived there in Beijing. You've covered extensively reporting from China. We heard the Chinese foreign minister this week saying, quote, might is not necessarily right. How is Beijing playing this?
China is in a peculiar position because it is suffering from this crisis, oil-wise, because it needs the oil and the gas from the Gulf. And if this war goes on, that might become a serious problem for China, not only because of oil, but also because of the trade flux, the trade, I would say, between the continents, between Asia and Europe. But so far, it's been very prudent in its approach to the conflict, because the sentence that you quoted is not a real condemnation. It's not. It's rather prudent. So now
he doesn't identify the country.
Exactly. So what I believe is that China is betting on an Iranian success. Success being the capacity of the Iranian regime to be resilient, to stay on.
As
so
Stephen
that's
said,
probably
to withstand.
That's probably the Chinese bet at the moment. Now, when you read international reports, when you try to dig on information from think tank, to me there is a mystery. And the mystery is what is happening along the Pakistani border with Iran. It's a mountainous border, so it's not an easy border to cross. But Pakistan is a country very friendly to China. So do we have actually some networks, some traffic of weaponry, technology, information going still as we speak from China to Iran through Pakistan. I'm surprised that nobody has really dig onto the issue, but probably because the information are really difficult to get. Secondly, keep in mind that China has sent a ship that is considered as a spy ship, a ship with a lot of radar and so on in the region to monitor the situation. So China is playing the wait-and-see game, but again, I believe they are betting on Iranian resistance.
Well, it's not a bad point to bring to Christina. Pakistan is an area of expertise and years spent reporting on the ground. Christina, what did you make of that?
I think we have to bear in mind that Pakistan is a bit tied up at the moment with its own war that is getting very little attention and has been bombing Kabul and Kandahar and border areas of Afghanistan. So that has been really taking up its attention the last couple of weeks. But it does have close relations with Iran. And I noticed that they were claiming that they were able to escort oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz because of an agreement with Iran. So, it is a country that actually, of all countries, probably has the closest relations now with the US again. Pakistan's military chief having been the first to nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize last year, which he then got invited to lunch at the White House, but also has these close relations with Iran and with China. So they could play some role here, but I'm not aware that at the moment of what's going on that border, which is a border where there's a lot of kind of drug smuggling goes on.
Yeah, well, President Trump has to make do with the FIFA Peace Prize. It looks rather odd at this particular moment. Stephen, just listening to Christina, one thing we haven't mentioned, and I think we should, artificial intelligence, which is increasingly shaping this war and others that will follow. The Pentagon making it clear in the last few days it wants to be able to use the technology of the tech giants as it sees fit, quote, within legal means. We know Anthropic, this AI bot Claude that it has, was used in the capture of Maduro in Venezuela. Anthropic refusing to allow use of its AI for 1, mass surveillance, 2, for developing anonymous weapons, and it's being cast out for it, classed as a supply chain risk. Interesting, Stephen, as a result, Anthropic's this week has become the most downloaded app, overtaking ChatGPT. Does that tell us something about, even in war or despite war, the public demand for ethical AI?
Well, it does. It's also true that Anthropic has been used in this war, too, and that one of the problems with this targeting of the school may have been that it was chosen by AI. We don't know that, but this has been one of the things that we're investigating. I just wanted to say another word about the Chinese ship that's hovering. China is very interested in the American Navy for lots of real reasons, given Taiwan. And I think China is learning a great deal about how the U.S. Navy works and responds and fights. So I suspect this is why China is lingering. Now, on AI, part of it, as normal people, we see it in terms of grotesque social media. You just talked about some of the stuff the White House has been putting out, let alone Iran, this embarrassing stuff. The way figures get manipulated, it's all propaganda. But in terms of targeting, I mean, what worries me always about AI, and always has been its military uses, has been the prospect of unmanned and unwomened combat. Drones is the smallest part of it, but people are working on fighter planes that are run by AI that, for example, surround more expensive planes. And this is the scary part. I mean, it's death from the sky, and you don't know who's actually ordering it.
Yeah, and this is a new, possibly defining element of wars to come. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you to a fantastic panel of distinguished, award-winning correspondents tonight, a combined expertise of at least 140 years on the ground reporting, and that's not including me, so we can chuck in another 20-odd. I did ask Claude to calculate, but it's something he did not know, or at least had the tact not to say. In the studio with me, thank you, Richard Worley, Paris-based correspondent for the Swiss publication Blick, author of This America That Hates Us and Ball of Illusions, What France Believes, What the World Sees. Thank you. Joining us from Beirut, thank you to France 24 senior correspondent Catherine Norris-Trent. Thank you, Catherine. Stay safe in Berlin. Thanks to Stephen Erlanger as well, a New York Times chief diplomat, editor for Europe. Thank you, Stephen. And in London, thank you, Christina Lamb, renowned war reporter, chief foreign correspondent for the Sunday Times, and acclaimed author, including of Our Bodies, Their Battlefield, What War Does to Women. Thank you, Christina. And thank you for watching and listening to the podcast. It is Oscars weekend, so I've picked out one to watch in the theme of tonight's programme. Shortlisted for Best Documentary, it's called Cutting Through the Rocks, the true story of an Iranian woman. Sarah Shaverdi, filmed over several years, her struggle to become a local village councillor in a conservative rural Iranian village. We'll leave you with this excerpt. Stay inspired. We'll see you in 7 days for the world next week.
شما خودتون رو در این حد ببینید که میخواید دکتر بشید، میخواید معلم بشید، میخواید مهندس بشید. حاضرین همتون دیگه؟ Hamımız zirengir. Hamımız başarabilir. Hamının elinden gelir. Anlaşa buzu bağla, xo.
تا آدم ولا تا بیل دنیا نه